10, 11, and 12, we are going to graph the sine or the cosine function again, problem type 2. This time we're going to have a change in our period. It's not going to have a shift to it. And so we're going to do pretty much the exact same thing we did on the previous problems. This one's starting with the cosine curve. So if I go with my normal table for cosine, 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Since it's a cosine curve, normally we do the amplitude at the beginning and the end, and we do opposite the amplitude in the middle, 0 and 0 halfway between those. But notice this one starts off with a -3. So we're going to do the -3 at the beginning and the end. The opposite of -3 means it's going to go to +3 there in the middle. Now this time we're going to take what's in our parentheses here, set them equal to each of our x values, and solve. So if I have 1/2 x is going to equal 0, 1/2 x is going to equal pi over 2, 1/2 x is going to equal pi, 1/2 x is going to equal 3 pi over 2, and 1/2 x is going to equal 2 pi. So if I'm going to solve each of these for x, I'm going to multiply by 2. Right? Cancel out my fractions. So times 2 on each of these. So I'm going to get 0 times 2, which is 0. Here the 2's cancel out, so I get pi. Here I'm just going to get 2 pi. Here I'm going to cancel out my 2's and get 3 pi. Here I'm going to get 4 pi. So now these are all my new starting values from my table. And so I'm going to have 0, pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, and 4 pi. So 0 is going to go to -3 since I'm doing the cosine function. My amplitude technically is 3, but since it's negative, I'm going to go down first. Pi is going to be at 0. 2 pi is going to go up to +3. 3 pi is going to be at 0, and 4 pi is going to go down to -3. So really stretched out my cosine curve. Instead of having a period of 2 pi, I ended up having a period of 4 pi for one complete cycle. Number 11, same kind of thing. I'm doing my sine curve first. So 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Since it's a sine curve, 0, 0, 0, my amplitude, and minus my amplitude. So this time my amplitude is going to be at 3/2, so this would be at -3/2. So figuring out my shift. 2x would equal 0. 2x is going to equal pi over 2. 2x is going to equal pi. 2x is going to equal 3 pi over 2. And 2x is going to equal 2 pi. So, if I'm getting rid of my coefficient, I'm dividing by 2, but since I'm working with fractions, dividing by 2 is multiplying by the reciprocal of 2, 1/2. I'm going to times by 1/2 to cancel out my fractions. So every one of these is going to get multiplied by 1/2. So 0 times 1/2 is 0. Pi over 2 times 1/2 would be pi over 4. Pi times 1/2 would be pi over 2. 3 pi over 2 times 1/2 is 3 pi over 4. And 2 pi, my 2's are going to cancel out, just gives me pi. So 0, pi over 4, pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, and pi. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, so those are in fourths. 0, 0 is my first point. Pi over 4 is at my amplitude of 3/2, so pi over 4 would be up at 1.5 right there. Pi over 2 would be 2 pi over 4, or halfway, going to be at 0. 3 pi over 4 is going to be at -1.5. And then at pi, we're going to be at 0. So this time my period is only pi instead of 2 pi, and my sine curve got smushed away together. And again, on Alex, it'll just keep going up, down, because my sine curve really continues on and on. We're just graphing one cycle of our curve. Number 12, we are going to do our cosine function. So if we're going to do our cosine function, 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. For our cosine, we have our amplitude, then we have 0, then we have the opposite of our amplitude, then we have 0, and then we have our amplitude, which in this case is positive 3. So 3, 3, negative 3 is going to be in the middle. So we are going to say 3/2 x equals 0, 3/2 x equals pi over 2, 3/2 x equals pi, 3/2 x equals 3 pi over 2, and 3/2 x equals 2 pi. So again, I'm dividing by 3/2, which is going to be multiplying by the reciprocal times 2/3 then. And so every one of these I'm going to multiply by 2/3. 2/3. Keep in mind that one thing. So 0 times 2/3 is 0. Here the 2's cancel out, so pi over 3. Here I'm going to get 2 pi over 3. Here's the 2 cancel out, the 3's cancel out, I just get pi, and there I'm going to get 4 pi over 3. So 1 pi over 3, 2 pi over 3, 3 pi over 3, 4 pi over 3. So this stays at 0, this is now pi over 3, this is 2 pi over 3, this would be pi, and this would be 4 pi over 3. I probably should have done this when we did 7, 8, and 9 so that you could see where I was going. So 0 is going to be at 3. Pi over 3, we are in sixths again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 2 pi over 6 would be at 0. 2 pi over 3 would be 4 pi over 6. We're going to be down to negative 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pi, which would be pi, 0. And then 4 pi over 3 would be 8 pi over 6. So 6, 7, 8 is going to be up to 3. And so our graph is going to look something like that. So when there's a number in front of the x, it is going to change what the period is. The period normally is 2 pi, but it's either going to smush it together or stretch it out further. Again, the number in front is your amplitude. Normal amplitude is positive numbers because I use the absolute value to give my amplitude. My amplitude, by the way, is how high and low I'm going. I'm going 3 above and 3 below. If it's negative, I go down first instead of up first, so it would start down here at negative 3 and then go up. And so it does the opposite of if you had a positive or a negative.